হ্যালো, শোনা যাচ্ছে?
জি স্যার।
ওকে, so today's topic is pathophysiology of heart failure and its organic and metabolic effects. So uh, this is Dr. Soumitra Chakraborty. I'm assistant professor of pathology at Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Medical University. Now, uh, uh, the first of all, we have to know um, how the heart fails, or there are six main ways the heart can fail, uh, which are listed here. It can be pump failure. The pump may be all right, but the flow may be obstructed, and maybe the flow is okay in one direction, but then it flows back, that is regurgitant flow. And also there could be some kind of bypassing of flow, which is shunted flow. And we know heart has a conduction system, electrical conduction system. So this is another area which can be disordered, which can result in heart failure. And last of all, uh, there can be rupture of heart or major vessels, which is also a possible reason behind heart failure. Now, heart doesn't fail all at once. It it doesn't fail uh, abruptly. It's a step by step process. At first, when heart fails to meet the demand uh, by its pumping function or something else, whenever heart fails to meet the demand of systemic or pulmonary circulation, that is called heart failure. So when this demand is not met, the heart first tries to regain some of its capacity by Frank Sterling mechanism. Then if the cardiac function is restored, then okay, no problem. But if the Frank Sterling mechanism is not enough to restore the cardiac function, then comes the activation of neurohumoral systems, which mainly includes norepinephrine, renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system, and atrial natriuretic peptides. So please note that this neurohumoral system is also targets for certain drugs in cardiovascular diseases. So these activation of neurohumoral systems, they uh, try to restore the cardiac function. If it's restored, then okay, but if it's not, then comes the myocardial adaptation. It's a slightly long-term thing. It includes the uh, cardiac hypertrophy, but also has got other components. And all those components together are called myocardial adaptations. It also includes some sort of remodeling. But this myocardial adaptation, if it can restore the cardiac function, then well and good. But if not, then it leads to decompensation, the point of no return. At this point, the damage has been done, which cannot be fully reversed to return back to normal. Am I audible? শোনা যাচ্ছে? শুনতে পাচ্ছেন কথাগুলো? বোঝা যাচ্ছে? Hello?
জি স্যার।
Huh? Okay. Uh, if you have any query, you can ask in the chat box, or uh, at the end we can have a question answer session as well. Now, the cardiac insufficiency, dysfunction, failure, well, there are different names for it, a different degree of functional loss. It can be broadly categorized into two groups. One is systolic insufficiency, systolic dysfunction, or systolic failure, also known as forward failure. And the other is diastolic insufficiency, dysfunction, or diastolic failure, also known as backward failure. The systolic insufficiency is basically low ejection fraction, and the diastolic insufficiency is filling defect. So the systolic insufficiency can occur from ischemic injury. The heart cannot pump as well because it's not getting the blood supply it needs to operate. And it can also be due to pressure or volume overload from hypertension, valvular diseases most commonly. And if the ventricle is abnormally dilated, it also cannot pump properly. Its systolic function is impaired. And on the other hand, the diastolic failure or backward defect, it can result from left ventricular hypertrophy. Um, Myocardial fibrosis can contribute to diastolic failure, most commonly due to ischemic heart disease, but also in some cases of cardiomyopathies. And constrictive pericarditis, the heart cannot relax if it's constrictive pericarditis, and if it cannot relax, it will not have the normal amount of blood. Okay, it cannot receive the normal amount of blood it should receive during diastole. So the constrictive pericarditis is also cardiac amyloidosis or amyloid deposition within heart muscles and other parts of the heart. So this can stiffen the heart. It can make heart rigid, so it fails in the diastolic phase, and it's also a type of backward failure. um, it can happen at different spectrums. Sometimes these are systolic insufficiencies. If it's more than that, then it's systolic dysfunction. If it's failure, then it's systolic failure. So there are different terms to be used at different severity of the loss of function. So hence the alternative terms are given here um, as well. Now, there are patterns of cardiac hypertrophy. One is the due to pressure overload, and other is due to volume overload. Due to pressure overload, like in hypertension or aortic stenosis, the uh, uh, sarcomeres are assembled in parallel to one another. Can you see the cursor, mouse pointer? Can you see the mouse pointer? Is it visible?
Yes, sir. Visible, sir.
Okay. So these are a parallel assembly of sarcomeres. So the hypertrophy due to pressure overload, it causes the parallel assembly of sarcomeres, which results in increased thickness of the cardiac chamber, the particular chamber, in this case the ventricle. And if it is volume overload, like valvular regurgitation, the heart is pumping but it's the blood is flowing back. So these kind of things, it causes volume overload. So in this case, the hypertrophy occurs in such a way that it assembles the sarcomeres in series, one after another, one after another. It's like long lines of sarcomeres. So this does not result in thickened wall, but since these are arranged in tandem, it actually creates a bigger ventricle. I mean, think about it like this: if there is high pressure, then it has to act against higher pressure, and we all know from physiology that the higher the cross-sectional area of a muscle, it can exert higher pressure. The pressure is directly proportional to the cross-sectional area of the muscle. So whenever there is pressure overload, the cross-sectional area of the muscle will increase. And to achieve that, the sarcomeres has to assemble themselves in parallel, resulting in a thick wall. But in case of volume overload, it has to handle a larger volume of blood. So that is not achievable by parallel assembly or wall thickening. That has to do something by increasing the ventricular capacity, and that can happen by by series, by series assembly of sarcomeres, resulting in a bigger chamber. So the pressure overload and volume overload, sometimes they overlap, But if the pressure overload is predominant, then the wall thickness will increase and lumen will be small, but ventricular lumen. But if it is predominantly volume overload, then wall thickness will not as much, will not be as much, but the ventricular lumen will be huge. So uh, heart weight is a better indicator of hypertrophy than wall thickness, because you do not get uh, you don't do not always get these kind of things, especially if something is the patient has a condition which is related, which causes volume overload like valvular regurgitation. In that case, wall thickness will not give you a good uh, estimate of cardiac hypertrophy. So as a whole, the heart muscle mass will increase. So uh, heart weight is a better indicator in this case. And there are ways to measure heart weight non-invasive by radiological measures, but I will not go into that here. Now, you might see, you might notice that the cardiac compromise, some kind of cardiac compromise is there. If there is loss of pressure, I mean, if heart needs to act against a higher pressure, then it will increase its wall thickness so that it can pump with more vigorous force during systole. So if it tries to achieve a better systolic capacity, then it has to lose the diastolic capacity, because in diastole, this heart will not be able to relax properly. On the other hand, if it tries to handle a lot of blood volume, then it will increase its diastolic efficiency, but in doing so, it will lose its some of its systolic efficiency, because in systole it will not be able to eject uh, eject the blood as efficiently as it did before. The ejection fraction will be much higher, maybe more than 65. uh, Sorry, the ejection fraction will be lower, maybe less than 45%. So in that case, it will there will be systolic insufficiency. So in normal heart, the systole and diastole, these are not cardiac cycle times, it is efficiency. Uh, this box plot shows efficiency, not actually this nested bar diagram is not showing the cardiac cycle, because in that case the diastole will have longer period and systole will have shorter period. This is about efficiency. In normal heart, the systole and diastole are equally efficient, but if the heart tries to increase its systolic capacity, it will lose its diastolic capacity. And if the heart tries to increase its diastolic capacity, it will lose its systolic capacity. So both diastolic and systolic capability cannot be improved at the same time. You try to do better on one side, you lose some of the capacity on the other side. So this is the basic principle we have to keep in mind. Am I clear? Was the explanation okay to you?
Yes,
Hello?
sir.
Huh?
Yes.
Okay. Now, there are different mechanisms that can increase the cardiac workload. Uh, Here is shown, and it in turn causes some changes that can be characterized by increased heart size and mass, increased protein synthesis, and sometimes some immediate early genes or fetal gene programs get turned on, and abnormal proteins are produced, fibrosis, and the blood vessels do not proliferate as much as the heart size increases. It lags behind. All these things causes cardiac dysfunctions, arrhythmias, and neurohumoral feedback mechanisms. Here we see a normal and hypertrophied heart. uh, you might say that these two are the same slides, same histological pictures. Only this one is zoomed. I mean, seen at higher magnifications. So do you think that this and this are actually the same image, because but the bottom one is viewed at a higher magnification? Does it look like this what I'm saying? Hello, hello.
জি স্যার, জুম করা হয়েছে মানে ম্যাগনিফাই করার কারণে হচ্ছে বড় দেখাচ্ছে মনে হচ্ছে।
Yeah, the upper one is less magnified, lower one is more magnified. Looks like that, right?
জি স্যার।
But in reality, both are at the same magnification, same power, same amount of magnification is done on both the photomicrographs. The hypertrophy causes the heart muscle cells to increase in size, as well as the nucleus increases in size, because there are gene duplications. There are more nuclear materials here to make more proteins. Okay, so you'll not exactly get a single haploid copy, diploid copy here. You will get even duplicate copies of chromatin materials in case of hypertrophied heart. It has to create more protein. That's why it needs the more copies of the same gene to be active at the same time. So the nucleus is also enlarged. That's why uh, the both the nucleus and cytoplasm has become larger, and uh, that's why it looks like this image is seen at a higher magnification here. But in reality, both are at the same magnification. One is normal from the normal heart, and the other is from a hypertrophied heart. And this is the mechanism of cardiac hypertrophy. The mechanical workload or neurohumoral mechanisms or growth factors, etc. Uh, this is a myocyte. And these signals causes some transcription factors to activate and some genes to turn on the switch on, which in turn causes the changes in the cells that results in hypertrophy. So and one thing is to keep in mind that uh, cardiomegaly is an independent risk factor for sudden cardiac death. If someone has a bigger heart, we appreciate that person. Uh, Maybe that person has no other symptoms, like the cardiomegaly has compensated. It's a kind of adaptation, so it compensated for the cardiac workload and other abnormalities, cardiovascular abnormalities that he or she might be having. But cardiomegaly itself, irrespective of all other factors, is an independent risk factor for sudden cardiac death. So this has to be kept in mind. Uh, there are some molecular mechanisms proposed behind that, but I will not go into detail about it. But as a cardiologist, you have to remember some key facts, and this is one of those. The Now here is a question: if hypertrophy is an adaptation, why is it so bad? I mean, adaptations help the body to get adjusted with changing environment. This is a type of cellular adaptation, hypertrophy. So and hypertrophy is usually reversible. If you take away the load, it will go back to normal. In most cases, adaptations is a reversible condition. So if hypertrophy is an adaptation, why we're so worried about this, and why does it show all these bad signs? The thing is that it's not inherently bad, you know, because these adaptations it evolved not in humans but in other mammals, other other lineages as well. We inherited it from our ancestors. So this was kind of naturally selected because it gave advantage in wild I mean, environment where we needed to engage in a lot of physical activity to get our once a daily meal. It was a very tough time when people used to live in jungles and in caves, and even before that, before humans, modern humans. So these are the naturally selected mechanisms that helped us survive. So it is not inherently bad. It millions of years ago, it helped us to become what we are today. But the thing is that uh, our modern lifestyle has extended our lifespan a lot, and changed our daily habit. We are not searching for food all day. We do not do as much physical activity as we used to do. So the body is not prepared for this. The natural selection is not prepared, has not prepared us for such an environment, and it has this change has come so suddenly that the human population didn't have time to adjust or evolve to accommodate these lifestyle changes, these increase in sedentary lifestyle and other lifestyle modifications. And interestingly, the same kind of things, adaptations originally beneficial, naturally selected for the good of the species, but now turning against that species, it's causing some harm. It's also now seen in pet animals, like in cats and dogs. They're having diabetes, they're having cardiovascular diseases, exactly for the same reason. Now, hypertrophy is not inherently bad. Uh, Only the pathologic hypertrophy, that is bad in the long run, because only the heart muscle mass increases. The corresponding blood vessels supplying the muscle, they do not increase. So it's increasing of muscle mass without adequate angiogenesis. So that's where the problem begins. The muscle becomes prone to ischemia because it has gone bigger. The heart has gone bigger, but its blood supply has not increased as much. Now, in physiologic hypertrophy, it can be sometimes beneficial, sometimes bad. Like in static exercise, like weightlifting, where the whole body is not actually working, all the muscle groups are not involved. There is no. This is not actually stimulating the whole body at the same time, just targeting some specific muscle groups. This kind of static exercise and pressure load hypertrophy without sufficient increase in capillary density, it also causes less beneficial cardiac remodeling, and this is somewhat harmful. But aerobic exercises like long distance running, marathon running, like that, this causes adequate increase in vasculature in parallel with the increase in cardiac mass. So cardiac mass increases, and its blood supply also increases proportionately. So there is no risk of ischemia in that case, and it decreases the resting heart rate. The capillary surface area is increased, so it reduces the blood pressure. So the hypertrophy can be good, it can be bad. It depends on the context. Now, in case of pathologic hypertrophy, the left-sided heart failure uh, may eventually occur. There is a collective term like congestive heart failure, CHF, and the CHF can have both left heart and right heart components. But for the sake of discussion, we will discuss it a bit separately. But in reality, both types of failure, right heart and left heart failure, occurs more or less simultaneously. Sometimes the right sided heart failure predominates, sometimes the left-sided heart failure predominates, but we are going to look at it separately for the sake of better understanding for academic purposes. But in reality, you might have to deal with both at the same time. So now, left-sided heart failure has four main types of causes: ischemic heart disease, hypertension, aortic and mitral valvular diseases, and primary myocardial diseases like cardiomyopathies and other genetic diseases, etc., etc. So these are the four main causes of left-sided heart failure. When fails, it causes some increased pressure, increased pressure on pulmonary vasculature, and it causes hemorrhage. You see this. This is an alveoli. This is alveoli. There is some bleeding here. So pinkish areas. These are RBCs, but not due to the color is not due to hemoglobin here. It's stained. It's colored by using external pigments, colored pigment that is called stain. So, but there is also internal pigment. Can anybody say that in the what are these cells? What are these brown things here inside alveoli? Can anyone say?
So macrophage, sir.
Macrophage, sir.
And where does this brown pigment come from? Anyone?
স্যার এটা আরবিসি মানে ডেড আরবিসি গুলোকে স্যার এনকাপ করছে স্যার।
Exactly. It's RBCs are engulfed by the macrophages, and because RBCs are not supposed to be inside alveolar sac, the RBC is supposed to remain inside the blood vessel. So when the pressure is increased, the backflow increases, and the RBC gets out of the blood vessels due to the pressure and rupture of the vessels, etc. And then the macrophages see them as foreign substances. They engulf the RBC. Uh, well, the RBCs are not yet dead. It's the live RBC in this case, because they're regarded as foreign here. And then the hemoglobin is degraded. The hemoglobin is taken apart. Its globin and heme portions are taken apart. The globins are proteins. They will be recycled to make some other proteins sometimes, or maybe by reticuloendothelial system or something else. Uh, but the main thing here, the non-protein part, that is the heme portion, it has got the iron, and the heme portion is processed into hemosiderin, which contains iron, and that iron containing compound hemosiderin, which comes from heme, that looks like this brown pigments. Now we see that macrophages has got this brown pigment. These are called hemosiderin laden macrophages or histiocyte. And when you see these cells inside alveoli, it indicates that it almost always indicates that there is some kind of heart failure there. So these cells within hemosiderin-laden histiocytes or macrophages are found, can be found in almost anywhere of the body, wherever there is some kind of long-term hemorrhage. I mean, if uh, there is a hematoma, in my body somewhere, I get injured or something, I fall from somewhere, I break my leg or get a bruise, so there will be hematoma, there will be hemorrhage, and eventually in a few days macrophages will come, inflammation, following the sequence of inflammation, the macrophage will come at some point. It will take the it will engulf the RBCs that were extravasated. So eventually it will form hemosiderin laden histiocytes in any kind of chronic hemorrhage, not just in heart failure. But if you find hemosiderin-laden histiocytes inside alveoli, then the most likely cause is heart failure. So these cells are called heart failure cells. So, but that doesn't mean that if you find hemosiderin-laden macrophage anywhere in the body, you call it heart failure cell. It's only called heart failure cell when you find it inside uh, alveoli. Can anyone give me a feedback? Why is that so? Hello? Hello? Do you hear me?
স্যার শোনা যাচ্ছে স্যার?
Okay. So I asked you a question, like the hemosiderin-laden histiocytes, they are in general, their presence indicate that has been a chronic or old hemorrhage. But why it is called heart failure cell, and when? Any kind of old hemorrhage will have hemosiderin-laden macrophages after a few days. So why it is called heart failure cell here? Can anyone say? Okay, so hemosiderin-laden macrophages uh, can be found in any old humerus site, but in relation to heart failure, it is only found in uh, within the alveoli. So if in the lung alveoli you find these cells, these are heart failure cells. But if you find it somewhere else in the body, that is just hemosiderin his macrophages, indicative of some hemorrhage. Here in within the lung, it also indicates a hemorrhage, but a lung can bleed from the alveoli only in a very specific circumstances, and the most common of it is the heart failure. So that's why it's called heart failure cell. But don't think that anywhere in the body, hemosiderin-laden macrophage will be called heart failure cell. It's only if it's in the lung alveoli, then it's called the heart failure cell. And also there is other change related to heart failure, which is called pulmonary edema. Here you see the pinkish substance, almost these are alveolar spaces, and the pinkish substance almost covering everywhere. And also these are actually edema fluids, proteinaceous fluids. That's why they are stained this light pink. So these are some of the features, histological features obtained from the autopsies of the patient who had heart failure. Now, sure.
স্যার এটা কি শুধু স্যার সিস্টোলিক সিস্টোলিক হার্ট ফেলিওর হয়ে যায়, আপনি ডায়াস্টোলিক ব্যক্তির সময় বললেন স্যার ফেলিওর ক্ষেত্রে, এটার ক্ষেত্রে হবে নাকি শুধুমাত্র সিস্টোলিক?
I can't hear you properly. Your audio is coming is breaking up. Could you please repeat or type into the chat box, please? I can't hear you. You're breaking up. Your voice.
সরি স্যার, আমি চ্যাট বক্সে দিচ্ছি স্যার।
Okay. Now the your class is supposed to contain the organic effects. So I tried to come up with organ specific changes in left heart failure and also congestive heart failure in general. So what are the respiratory symptoms? The pulmonary congestion and edema that will lead to cough and dyspnea with exertion. I mean, at first at rest there will be no shortness of breath, but after some exercise or something, I mean, some physical activity, the patient will experience cough and a shortness of breath. Then if it's proceed further without treatment, without management, then there will be orthopnea and or paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. That means the patient will have difficulty breathing while lying, but uh, but he or she will feel better if they sit up or stand up, or erect posture. And paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea is a sudden severe breathlessness that the patient got awakened from sleep and uh, feels like he or she is going to die, but when she sits on the bed, everything becomes normal. This is called paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. So this is a little bit of severe than cough and dyspnea with exertion, and that will be followed by the dyspnea at rest. The patient will be short, will have difficulty breathing um, almost all day long, all the time, whether rest or doing some exercise, whatever. So this is the respiratory features that results from pulmonary congestion and edema. And there are left ventricular early left heart failure features, which might be cardiac features. The myocardial infarction, it can lead to localized loss of myocytes, which will trigger the hypertrophy on the surrounding viable myocytes. And this type of hypertrophy is not very beneficial because it's uncoordinated. It's a electrically neutral or inactive patch in the middle, and surrounding there is area of hypertrophied myocyte. This will only cause uncoordinated contraction and electrical activity. The cells are programmed to do so, so they are doing that. They don't know whether it will be beneficial or not. They're programmed to compensate for cardiac insufficiency through hypertrophy. They get signals from mechanical and signals. They get neurohumoral signals, so they get hypertrophied, but it results even more insufficiency, cardiac insufficiency, because now the electrical and mechanical actions are uncoordinated around a dead patch or fibrotic patch of the myocardium, which was actually a dead myocardium. Now, on the other hand, the progressive ventricular dilatation, which may or may not result from myocardial infarction, it can result from other things like volume overload, as we discussed previously. So that's why this is given as a dashed line, because it doesn't have to come always from the myocardial infarction. The progressive ventricular dilatation can happen from other causes as well. Now, that will displace the papillary muscles. As you can imagine, if you close your eyes and think that if ventricles dilate, then the papillary muscles will be displaced outwards, and this will cause mitral regurgitation, because if the papillary muscles are projecting outwards, the valve will not close properly. So uh, the mitral regurgitation will occur, and this will cause chronic dilatation of the left atrium. And in this case also there will be atrial fibrillation, because the it will disrupt the normal conduction pathway, and may even generate some secondary pacemaker points within the within the atrium. So this will cause atrial fibrillation. There are some closed circuits will be formed there, and these circuits will cause electrical disruption. So ultimately, the heart will not pump efficiently. It will cause stasis of the blood and sometimes thrombus. So these are pathogenesis within the heart due to left heart failure. And there are miscellaneous features like uh, you find fine crackles or frills at lung base, like the burning of firewood. It sounds like that, because the edematous pulmonary alveoli, which I have showed before, uh, sometimes they pop just open, like that, this kind of sound. If you this kind of sounds can be heard. This can also happen in other causes like in pneumonia, but in the context of left heart failure, there are fine rails at the lung base, because the uh, there is pulmonary edema, and at the inspiration, the alveoli suddenly pops open, which was fluid filled, and it creates a sudden burst of air coming out and causes the sound. This creates a fine rails at inspiration. Now, cardiac hypertrophy, it will result in cardiomegaly, which can be seen in imaging, already discussed about it. And neurohumoral activation, it will cause tachycardia, and the volume overload will cause a split of heart sound, creating the third heart sound. And uh, increased myocardial stiffness will result in the fourth heart sound. So third and fourth heart sound, those are the features of this, can be features of left heart failure as well. And moderate features, I mean slightly long term but not that advanced, intermediate type of features. It can happen in left heart failure separately or as a whole in congestive heart failure. There are some features. I mean, heart failure patients can have azotemia, the increased nitrogenous substances within blood, like blood urea nitrogen or urea as a whole, like that. So how does it happen? When the ejection fraction is decreased, the renal perfusion is decreased, and uh, kidney senses it as kind of a low volume condition, but in reality blood volume is okay, but less perfusion is within the kidney, so kidney senses it as uh, low volume condition, and then it triggers the feedback loop, renin angiotensin aldosterone system, which increases salt and water retention, and this ultimately exacerbates the pulmonary edema, because the body was not able to handle the normal blood volume. Now there's blood volume is increased by this mechanism. So this is also supposed to be an adaptive mechanism, but now it's working against us. So normally in hypovolemic condition, this could be life-saving, this renin-angiotensin system, but in the setting of heart failure, it's causing more water retention and salt retention, which is leading to even more pulmonary edema, more severe symptoms, more workload on heart. So this is a vicious cycle. Now, a further reduction of ejection fraction will be there in turn, and it in turn will cause severe renal hypoperfusion. The renal hypoperfusion will start to decrease, and it will not stop there unless the workload is somehow not managed. Then the severe renal hypoperfusion, it will lead to pre-renal azotemia. So heart failure will ultimately lead to renal failure uh, by this vicious cycle of renin-angiotensin aldosterone system. That's why in treatment of hypertension and as well as post-MI patients in cardiac remodeling, angiotensin interfering with this pathway is very useful therapeutic measures. Like ACE inhibitors are very useful because this mechanism helps propagate uh, the heart failure into renal failure. The ACE inhibitor can prevent that if given properly. So far, can you understand what I'm discussing? Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Huh?
Yes,
Hello.
sir.
Okay. Now the advanced features. The advanced features of left heart failure or in congestive heart failure in general in central nervous system. So when central nervous system gets involved, uh, then it is considered as advanced heart failure. So cerebral hypoperfusion causes hypoxic encephalopathy, and hypoxic encephalopathy has got some clinical features like irritability, loss of attention span, and restlessness. If you see in a heart failure patient, uh, I mean these three features, then it's most likely there is hypoxic encephalopathy, and if it's not treated, then it will ultimately lead to ischemic cerebral injury, which will result in stupor and coma, and sometimes death. So these are the advanced features due to cerebral hypoperfusion, which can occur from heart failure if not managed. Now, the right-sided heart failure. So right-sided heart failure has got main two groups of causes. One is left-sided heart failure causes right-sided heart failure. Then it's called biventricular failure, and mostly you will get cases of biventricular failure who has got both sides of signs of both sides of heart failure. Maybe it started with left-sided failure, then the right-sided become prominent, but these are biventricular failures. And there are some cases where you get isolated right-heart failure, and mostly these are all due to lung causes. So these are core pulmonale, and core pulmonale can occur from parenchymal lung disease like COPD. Primary pulmonary hypertension can cause isolated right-sided failure. Also, recurrent pulmonary thromboembolism is another cause, and pulmonary vasoconstriction, like that occurs in obstructive sleep apnea. These all can cause isolated right heart failure. Now, isolated right heart failure is basically a problem in the filling defect. The venous return is not adequately coming into the heart, or heart cannot handle the blood. That's why there is backflow and back pressure, and there's congestion and edema, etc. Can affect almost all over the body. Now, a common finding in this case is a chronic passive hepatic congestion, where the blood pools into the liver, and ultimately the back pressure causes necrosis, ischemia and necrosis. So there is a pattern where there are zones, particular zones of necrotic area and some viable area. So there is some alternating pattern around the uh, hepatic venues, hepatic vascular channels. So this kind of pattern causes a pattern like this nutmeg. In Bangla we call it jaifal, jayatri jaifal. So if you take a section of this will look like this: some this tan area and also some white area. So this tan area, actually these are congested areas, and this white area, they're dead areas. So these kind of alternating patterns are seen within the liver, and that's why it's called nutmeg liver. It's a chronic passive hepatic congestion. uh, it can result from uh, result from right heart failure, but it can also result from portal hypertension for any reason. It can also, I mean, if the blood cannot go out of the liver, and sits there for a long time and causing a pressure effect on its vascular and other, and resulting in ischemia. So this will actually result in this kind of changes. In the setting of right heart failure, it's sometimes it causes cirrhosis. In that case, it's called cardiac cirrhosis. So this is the macroscopic view. You can see that some tan areas and some yellow areas actually, and like these features, these pale areas. And in microscopic features, this is a necrotic area and this is a viable area. And the viable area has got many RBCs within them, and that's why it looks like tan. The congested and the necrotic parts are side by side, like a zigzag pattern. And the features of isolated right heart failure, and also in some cases of biventricular failure also, some features could be passive congestion. It causes hepatosplenomegaly, and the bile wall may be edematous and leading to malabsorption. And that's why sometimes the nutritional supplementation is necessary for heart failure patients. So congestion, and if the congestion happens in combination with hypoperfusion, then the liver will be affected. As I've shown, the centrilobular necrosis will be there. It's early change, and if it keeps going, and then it will result in cirrhosis. In that case, in the setting of heart failure, it's called cardiac cirrhosis of liver. And effusions may progress and ultimately resulting edema all over the body. That's called anasarca. And the hallmark of right heart failure is actually dependent edema, mainly in pedal and pre-tibial edema in general. But in case of bedridden patients, you'll not probably get pedal or pre-tibial edema, because the patient uh, the- is bedridden, lies all the time, so the fluid doesn't the dependent area for that patient is not pedal or tibial area. The dependent area for that patient is presacral area. So in bedridden patients, the hallmark of right heart failure will be presacral edema. Now, right heart failure and left heart failure, mostly they present together, and left heart failure is actually causes predominantly pulmonary edema, and right heart failure is predominantly systemic edema, but there are overlaps. Now, the last part of this today's lecture is the metabolic and biochemical changes. At the cellular level, the metabolic and biochemical changes are like this. There is insulin resistance, lipotoxicity, mitochondrial dysfunction, and hyperactivation of neurohormonal system. Why is it so? Because here you see that glucose and fatty acid metabolic pathways in normal cardiomyocyte. So normally the glucose metabolism acetyl CoA, it inhibits the beta oxidation or fatty acid breakdown within the mitochondria of the cardiomyocytes. So normally you do not see that cardiomyocytes are utilizing much fat. It mostly runs on glucose. It normally runs on glucose, but when there is insulin resistance, then there is it cannot use glucose as much, and the insulin resistance results from the metabolic alterations caused by the genes associated with cardiac hypertrophy, and also by some of the neurohumoral factors contributing to this heart failure. So ultimately, the and also the ischemia. So all these things results in low energy state of the of the cardiac myocytes. So if energy is depleted, that means the acetyl CoA is also depleted, and the acetyl CoA is depleted. That's why it cannot inhibit the beta oxidation anymore, and the beta oxidation, it causes it tries to revive the acetyl CoA, I mean the TCA cycle, but ultimately this causes lipotoxicity and mitochondrial dysfunction, and this cycle continues until the if the metabolic disturbance cannot be corrected. That's why uh, drugs or therapies that combat insulin resistance is sometimes uh, is being considered as a potential therapy of heart failure patients, because this is a vital part of the cardiomyocytes, that this metabolic alteration can lead to other irreversible changes. There are many detailed papers about it. You'll get this presentation, and you can, download and read it from these references. I've cited two articles here, journal articles here, on the details of the biochemical changes and how it can guide the therapy. Now, there are changes at the systemic level as well. The previous one was the cellular level. Now, the systemic level, there is increase in insulin resistance. There is fatty liver. Even the heart muscles, they themselves becomes fatty. So the vasoconstriction is there, and there is increase in insulin receptor substrate, which is again an indicator of insulin resistance. The renin angiotensin system uh, makes the thing worse, leads to renal failure if remains unchecked, as I have mentioned previously. So all this forms actually a vicious cycle that ultimately affects all of the systems of the body, almost all of the systems of the body that is affected by heart failure. So this mechanism is shown here in brief, and if you want to know detail, you can read the paper mentioned here. You'll be able to download or look for it when I forward this presentation to you. Now, lastly, there is another marker, that is BNP, that is a B-type natriuretic factor. We have already talked about ANP, that A-type natriuretic peptide, that is secreted by the atrium. But the ventricular cardiomyocyte also secretes something. Initially, it was thought that it comes from brain, but later it's also found that ventricular cardiomyocytes also releases that. That's why it's no longer called brain natriuretic factor. It's called B-type natriuretic factor. What is the A-type factor? That is the ANP, the atrial natriuretic factor. The atrium is not the only place where it comes from. So ANP is no longer is sometimes not called atrial. It's called A-type natriuretic uretic peptide, and BNP is B-type natriuretic peptide. So the B-type comes from the ventricular cardiomyocytes alongside other places like brains. Now, increased wall stress, it causes the ventricular cardiomyocyte to release this, and it increases renal excretion of sodium and water, tries to bring some balance about this. But on its own, the physiological mechanism is not sufficient to reverse heart failure in most cases. So the therapy targeting the enhancement of the effects of BNP is now being considered. Now, any questions, please? Somebody tried to ask a question. I couldn't hear it properly. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
জি স্যার শোনা যাচ্ছে স্যার
So any questions? Somebody tried to ask a question before. I do not see a question in the chat box. The heart failure, it's about the heart failure cells. So from Dr. Muhammad Nakir Ali. So heart failure cells, where it can be found in systolic or whether it can be found in systolic or diastolic failure. Okay, so it mainly occurs in the setting of left heart failure. Okay, it occurs in this. It's not directly related to systolic or diastolic, but mostly in the setting of left heart failure, and the left heart failure means the heart cannot pump the blood into systemic circulation. So there is a backflow, and if the left heart cannot pump the blood out, then where will be the pressure be exerted in the pulmonary system? And that's what causes the extravasation of RBCs from alveolar capillaries, and that is ultimately taken up by the macrophages. But since left heart failure ultimately leads to biventricular failure, you might get in those cases as well. But heart failure cell is unlikely to be found in isolated right heart failures, and whether it is systolic or diastolic. Could I make myself clear about this?
জি স্যার, এটা মেনলি হচ্ছে পালমোনারি কনজেশন যখন হয় তখন হচ্ছে স্যার যে পালমোনারি ক্যাপিলারি ডাইলেশন হওয়ার পরে হচ্ছে মেনলি এক্সট্রাভেশনটা হয়।
Exactly. So this is basically in the setting of left heart failure, and also in the setting of left heart failure leading to biventricular failure, but not so much in case of right heart failure, because in that case right heart failure, the lung is getting less supply, right? So the pulmonary congestion is not the problem in case of right heart failure, isolated case of right heart failure. uh, this can be this is not specific to systolic or diastolic failure, rather it is related to left heart failure. Could I make myself clear? And left heart failure that causes pulmonary edema and congestion. So mm, is this what you are looking for? Are you satisfied with the answer?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Huh? Hello?
Yes, sir. Hello.
Okay. So any other questions?